This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwall podcast.
Hello all and welcome to episode 459 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm Osha from Borussia, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund's qualification in the Champions League for the round of 16 with a 3-1 win away to AC Milan, a comeback victory against Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Bundesliga, and we will preview Sunday's match against league leaders Bayer Leverkusen. For all that and more, join me, Matthias Zug. Hello, Matthias.
Hello, Stefan. How are you?
I'm doing very well after yesterday's result. And also here, Lars Bollmann. Hello, Lars. How are you doing?
Hello, Stefan. I'm fine, thanks.
All right. I don't know where exactly to begin. I guess with the overall headline maybe that Dortmund are indeed qualified in Group F, which has been dubbed Group of Death. Lars, why are Dortmund survivors?
Well, I suppose after 5 match days we can kind of agree that Group of Death might have been a bit of a misnomer. I think we probably all overestimated Newcastle coming back into the Champions League. I think they've had a lot of personnel issues, a lot of young players having to step in without the necessary experience, and obviously the club itself doesn't really have much European experience over the last few years. So I think we saw Newcastle's intensity in the Premier League and thought if they can replicate that on the international level, that would be very dangerous. And I think we can safely say that, at least in the Dortmund games, hasn't really happened that way. Obviously, I couldn't watch them against PSG yesterday. I haven't seen any of their other games, so this is very much a Dortmund-focused view. But I think Newcastle were a bit of a disappointment in the group stage so far, even though they can still qualify on the final match day. Milan, we talked about it briefly last week. They have a lot of personnel issues as well right now. Their best player, Rafael Leao, missing against Dortmund on Wednesday certainly helped Dortmund. And also, game state. I mean, if we'll get into this later, I suppose, but if Giroud scores the penalty, I doubt the game turns out as it did. And then obviously PSG, I think they're still finding themselves after a bit of turmoil in the summer. Not necessarily sure Luis Enrique is the best club head coach at this stage. I mean, he won the treble with Barcelona in, 2015, but that was with MSN in attack, which makes things a bit easier. And I think they haven't really fired on all cylinders. I think Paris's away form in the Champions League is abysmal over the last few years even, which is why they haven't really made those deep runs as they did maybe 3-4 years ago when they were in the final against Bayern, for example. So ultimately, without wanting to diminish what Dortmund have done, I think Group of Death might have been overstating things a bit. But obviously, we can also take the positive view and say that Dortmund have put in, outside of the game against Paris in France and parts of the Milan home game, so mostly talking about the last 3 games, which obviously were all wins against Newcastle and the way to Milan. Those were, by and large, mature performances. Ultimately deserved victories, even if they rode their luck certainly at Newcastle and even a bit in Milan, as I said, with game state and such. But ultimately, ball don't lie, I guess, is the old saying. And Dortmund have, 10 points after 5 match days in what may not have been ultimately the Group of Death, but still certainly a good group with, I think it's the only group with only teams from the top 5 leagues in Europe, so it certainly counts for something. And in that regard, I think we can certainly be happy with performances and ultimately results from Dortmund.
Yeah, Matthias, likewise question to you before we talk about the game itself. What does it mean for Dortmund to be already through with one match day to spare?
Well, it's huge, and including us, and a lot of people. They were looking at this group when it came out and said, Dortmund third if they're lucky. Most likely fourth. And if it wasn't for a, let's call it, questionable handball penalty call in the 98th minute, I believe it was, for PSG, Dortmund would have walked into the last match day as group winners already. And I think it's huge. It's a huge boost of confidence, which obviously is something the team needed, even though I think they kind of got that in the previous Bundesliga match, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it makes people perk up again about Borussia Dortmund once again. And I think we can't underestimate the positive effect this also has with things like conversations about recruitment of young players, new players, things like that. So all around great, especially because, Borussia Dortmund of these four is the only, and be careful which words I use here, let's say proper football club. In a way, I mean, we all know Newcastle is Saudi oil funded, PSG is Qatar funded, and Milan is, I believe, an American hedge fund funded club. And I know Dortmund is also on the stock exchange in Germany, but it still is still a German football club with 50+1 and all the rules that apply to that. So from that aspect as well, I think it's really great to see a club like Dortmund, already qualifying and with a decent chance of winning the group.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wonder if Emre Can would have collected a yellow card in the 97th or 96th minute yesterday had he known that PSG would get this penalty and the Dortmund wouldn't have won the group. My presumption is yes, still. But yeah, it was interesting to see this handball penalty, which according to the rules somehow is, according to the interpretation of the IFAB or whatever it is still according to the letter of the law. But obviously, I highly disagree with it. As pretty much everyone who sees the replay. I mean, where does the Newcastle defender? Where can he even put his hand in this instance, especially since the ball came off his chest first and deflected onto his arm, which was in a very normal motion. So, highly dubious penalty call in my book, to be honest. But obviously, we're not here to discuss that match because Dortmund did win in Milan 3-1, and if you go by their previous on-the-road record in the Champions League, it is actually quite amazing that Dortmund won back-to-back road games in the UCL. So, yeah, what happened? Dortmund conceded penalty very early. I think there were not too many discussions there to me that looked more a Stonewall penalty, that pretty much as Schlotterbeck definitely was hit on the arm by Chukwueze's goal and shot. And then of course Kobel did make the save, and in return a couple minutes later it was on the other end where Bynoe-Gittens was brought down and got to draw a penalty from Calabria, their, I think, right back, which Reus then expertly put away. And with that, Dortmund were up 1-0. Then of course Chukwueze did score the equalizer in the 37th minute by dribbling past Bensebaini and Bynoe-Gittens himself, and I think there was a slight deflection of Schlotterbeck's calf to score the equalizer. But in the second half, Dortmund well-crafted goals with Bynoe-Gittens and then Adeyemi in the 59th and 69th minute, which pretty much put the lid on the game. Matthias, my mother-in-law walked into the room at some point while I was watching the game and was noticing, I think that was when Dortmund were 1-0 up, how slow the game is. And I tried to explain to her that Dortmund are in no particular hurry right now and basically try to control the game as much as possible, and that they do play a bit differently in the Champions League than they do in the Bundesliga, because if my 80-year-old mother-in-law notices that the state of game is a little bit slower, then I assume it is fair to say that indeed this is exactly what happened yesterday. I mean, the spaces there were quite open, but what do you make of the differences between Dortmund playing in the Champions League and playing in the Bundesliga this season?
Well, I think it's down to also the pace of the opposition. I mean, we can't discount the fact that Milan play in the Serie A. I'm a fan of the Serie A, but Serie A tends to be a little bit slower pace at times, a little bit more, let's call it methodical. And I'll be perfectly honest, you were up 1-0 and Milan wasn't really giving you a reason to speed up the game. You know, they weren't really pressing Dortmund in any particular fashion. I mean, Newcastle were a little bit more aggressive in that respect. And Dortmund were playing to the opposition in this aspect. Like, well, why rush things now, especially given the pace that Milan have in Chukwueze and Pulisic to open yourself up. And, Milan, the one thing that really shocked me was, Milan left this huge gap, in my opinion, between their attacking players and their defense. I mean, there was at times almost no noticeable midfield resistance for Dortmund. And when there was, Dortmund, for the most part, handled it extremely well. So, no, there was no need to rush it and to hurry it based on the way the match was going. And Dortmund are playing at a different style, also because the opposition is playing differently in the Champions League. I mean, Milan, Newcastle, PSG, they want to be on the front foot. They believe they will dominate the match. They believe they are the better side. And so Dortmund can play different than in the Bundesliga, where for the most part, they are given the possession and said, okay, here, now do something with it. And whereas with these teams, I mean, yesterday was just weird, I'll be honest. I mean, Milan, I didn't quite understand what their game plan really was. At times, it just seemed a little bit disjointed. And Dortmund played to that very, very professionally as well, I may add.
Yeah, I mean, Dortmund, I think, could have been a bit more clinical in the final third. I thought that some of these counterattacks that look like they should look like in the first preseason game of the summer preparation and not round 5 of the Champions League. There are just a lot of miscommunications, misunderstandings, double commits, etc. That do grind my gears a little. But Lars, I would be remiss to not shift the focus a little bit on one individual performance. And of course, he was also honored with the Man of the Match award by the UEFA. Mats Hummels yesterday had an absolute magnificent performance. Is this one of his best Champions League performances, or is this just a vintage Hummels performance that he often shows, but we don't get to appreciate as often? Or don't appreciate as often, let's put it this way.
I mean, it can be both, I suppose. I'm struggling to remember a better performance from any centre half, if I'm being honest, in the Champions League. I mean, I'm sure someone will point out a vast number of examples one could argue here, but to me, this is kind of the perfect Hummels game. Maybe also because it was a bit slower. Obviously, not a lot of runs in behind to be expected from Olivier Giroud, who's more of a fox in the box kind of striker at this age, obviously. So, Hummels able to read the game, time his challenges perfectly. I mean, I think the one blemish that some people have pointed out was the counterattack where he didn't get the ball fully against, was it Loftus-Cheek, possibly? Mm-hmm. And when then Bensebaini and Riasson had to mop up, as it were. But even then, Hummels got enough of the ball to disrupt the timing of that counterattack, allowing his teammates to get into position to affect the outcome of that sequence. So even if you want to hold that against him, he still did well enough in that regard. So I think this was an absolutely imperious performance. basically the almost perfect game for the kind of center half that Hummels is. I think him personally, he probably would have liked to sprinkle in a couple of outside of the boot passes towards Malen or Bynoe-Gittens, or later on Adeyemi or Brandt or whomever, but I don't want to get too nitpicky. For me, this was the rare 10 out of 10 performance, and I tweeted or posted on X, if we have to call it that these days, today. One of the more funny things I read in a while, La Gazzetta dello Sport, the Milan-based paper, giving Hummels a 6.5 in their rating system out of 10.
What?
Yeah, putting him behind, for example, Bynoe-Gittens, which that's the only argument you can make, because Bynoe-Gittens obviously impacted the game going forward, which is always something that ratings will reflect a bit more, perhaps. But he was also behind, for example, Reus and Sabitzer had the same grade as Emre Can, Julian Riasson, and Fikayo Tomori and Malik Chow from Milan. So if anyone wants to tell me that basically all center backs in this game were at the same level, then I would like to have their credentials checked, please.
Yeah, whoever made these ratings probably just made it in, to be honest. I mean, there's no... Especially if it's an Italian journalist, you would think, just from your prejudice, I guess, that this person would be able to appreciate a performance like Hummels' even more so than, let's say, the average German reporter. I don't know. But either way, it is quite egregious. I mean, 10 tackles, 68 touches, 47 out of 50 completed passes. A lot of, I think, 40 carries, 2 out of 2 successful tack-ons for Hummels. I don't know. To me, it was just a masterclass, and made me already miss him, even though he's still there, if that makes sense. Just because how great this performance was. Matthias, if you want to chime in, to me, it was really one that is very memorable. Of other Champions League performances, there was one against Arsenal. I definitely also remember where he was just masterful. But yeah, yesterday, perfect game for Hummels to show his skill set.
Well, it was perfect, and to do it in Italy, the land of the defender. The land of the elegant defender, especially in Milan. If you think of Baresi and Maldini, it worked. It was nice. It was poetic, and doing it to Milan makes me especially happy. And I'm sure Lars agrees there as well. The interesting thing was, of course, in the English feed, we had Ray Hudson, who likes to speak a lot and use very colorful language, but again and again, whenever Hummels took the ball off a Milan player, you could just sense he went, whoa, every time. I mean, he was impressed, and that's when you know you're looking at an exceptional performance, and it was his vintage best Mats Hummels, especially not just his defending, but also his passing was fantastic. So, I mean, I can't think of a better performance by Mats Hummels in the Champions League for Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure who was going to be in the starting lineup in defense to begin with, because I wasn't quite sure what the status of Schlotterbeck was going to be. But when we talk about the lineup, I personally was fairly happy to see Bynoe-Gittens back in there. Matthias, he did reward Dortmund with the penalty and, of course, the head goal, but his defensive prowess is maybe nothing to rave about, but nevertheless, what do you make of his performance from the young Englishman, considering it was his first start in the Champions League?
Well, I mean, he's not paid to defend. So, I mean, if he's one guy where I'm like, okay, I'm not worried about defensive, work effort, it's probably him. At least his body language and his hustle is there. Like, he runs back and he tries, which from a player like him, for his skill set, what he's paid to do, and his age. Honestly, half the time, that's all I want. I want you to at least try. Because there are plenty of other players we could think back to his same age category that really didn't. And his countryman Jadon Sancho at that age was not as interested in a defensive hustle as Jamie Bynoe-Gittens. And of course, there are a lot of comparisons to Jadon Sancho at the same time and age, given that they both came from England. They both came through Manchester City at some point. And, Jadon Sancho at the same time also did a lot of what Bynoe-Gittens does in the term of taking a man on again and again and again and again. And then later, as he got older, he kind of added more to his repertoire other than just that, which right now is, 9 out of 10 times that's what Jamie Bynoe-Gittens does. And he does it, of those 10 times that he then does it, 2-3 times he gets through and create something fantastic. And I was really impressed. It was a form pick because he played well against Gladbach, and Terzic went, well, put him right back in, and he did not disappoint. And I like making those form picks, because when you're in a run and you build up momentum and build up that confidence, the worst thing you can do then is just sit it out for a match, which ends up being a week or two, and then you got to, build that back up. So I think all in all, extremely good.
All right, last final thoughts on the Milan game, and maybe a little projection to the PSG game. Is that now a complete dead rubber?
No. I mean, PSG can't expect to advance if they don't win at Dortmund, because Newcastle have won the head-to-head, and if PSG lose at Dortmund, even Milan can still advance to the knockout stages. So I think Paris have a lot to play for, and I think if you're Dortmund, you are definitely looking at least who's likely to be finishing their groups first. If you can avoid the likes of, let's say, Real Madrid, Man City in the round of 16, that's not the worst idea. Obviously, sometimes you can also get unlucky with your draws as the second seed, but it's also kind of a point of pride, I suppose, especially when you finish the group at home. You want to do well, go out with a win, and we should never forget that in the Champions League, a lot of things are also about money, and the prize pot gets a lot bigger when you win games. So there's still a bit to play for. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a small-sized contribution to resting some players. I mean, Emre Can took himself out of the game, as you alluded to earlier. And obviously that game comes in 2 weeks. So in the thick of this brutal run-in that Dortmund have to the winter break. So wouldn't be particularly surprising if there were a couple of changes from the starting 11, but it's not going to be the same way as it was against Copenhagen last year. I looked it up yesterday. We had fullbacks starting Torgan Hazard and Felix Passlack, and in attack Anthony Modeste, and quite a eclectic selection, as it were. So I'm not expecting that. Also because ultimately there's a responsibility to the other teams in the group. So, Dortmund don't want to be looked at with raised eyebrows from either Milan or Newcastle. Obviously, that's not the most important point, but I think there's a amalgamation of reasons why Dortmund take this game seriously, not least of which you want to finish the group first, because that's something to play for.
Yeah. Final thoughts on the Milan game? If you have any.
Maybe going back to Bynoe-Gittens, I was disappointed in Terzic not giving Bynoe-Gittens and Reina more minutes and even Moukoko to an extent after the cup game. Mm-hmm. Especially Reina not getting any minutes against Bayern. I don't quite remember how much he played against Stuttgart, if at all. So if we are praising Terzic now for picking Bynoe-Gittens against Milan on form, then perhaps we need also to look at why that wasn't the case before the international break.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if Reina started against Stuttgart or not.
No, he didn't start. I'm questioning whether he played at all. He definitely didn't play against Bayern, which came immediately after the cup game.
Reina came in the 63rd minute against Stuttgart. I just looked it up.
Better than nothing, but still, I mean, these kinds of positive players that like to take opponents on, I think Dortmund have too few of them on the pitch most of the time, because they have somewhat of a congestion in more central players that aren't dribblers, so the likes of Reus and Brandt, Sabitzer, Metscher when he's fit and available. Sometimes it feels like Terzic is too desperate to get too many of those guys on the pitch together, oftentimes putting Brandt on the wing, which always feels a bit wasteful, especially when you see Brandt against Gladbach moving to the center and running the show from there. So I just wish sometimes there were a bit, or there was a bit more positivity on the pitch, and that's something you get from these youngsters who don't really have any fear. Of Bynoe-Gittens is the best example. I mean, as Matthias said, his percentage of one-on-ones that come off is definitely not up to par yet, and that can be an issue when you lose the ball too often, and Dortmund's rest defense is sometimes questionable, but ultimately if two of those dribbles end up in a goal-scoring opportunity, then that's the job done, and something that we need to foster and nurture and not suppress.
Yeah, in that regard, also shout out to Adeyemi, I guess, because yesterday, after his substitution, was the first time he looked halfway decent in quite a while, I would actually say. Even though I'm not the best judge for that, because I haven't seen every minute of Dortmund this season, unfortunately, as I usually do. Because he did fairly well. Obviously, he did score a goal where I really liked how he moved the ball over for himself to the middle of the goal and then just had a shot. Obviously, it was a poor save. It wasn't like the best placed shot, but for that Füllkrug chance that hit the crossbar at the end of the game, he also just dusted his opponents quite nicely, and this is the sort of stuff you want to see from Adeyemi more consistently, and creates, of course, a lot of havoc. And I personally think that Dortmund have a lot of weapons at their disposal when it comes to attack. I can't wait for Duranville to come back, and maybe how it would look like if you have a wing setup of Bynoe-Gittens and Duranville out on both sides, and then I don't know, maybe even Gio Reyna in the middle of that to go with the complete young options, just to see how it looks like, to be honest. And then even if you want to put Moukoko up top and see how that looks like. But that being said, I was quite happy with the Füllkrug performance yesterday as well. Thought he did fairly well in hold-up play. Also was involved, of course, in the 2-1 that Dortmund scored. Because that was a nice sequence of touches between him and Sabitzer and Bynoe-Gittens, of course, who had a very precise effort. I'm not quite sure if there was a deflection on it or not. But that all being said, Matthias, I thought it was nice because at the last show we were talking about how Dortmund can have a nice performance and then turn around and can't bottle that up. Now, obviously, the game against Gladbach didn't start out so great for the Black and Yellows, because they found themselves 2-0 down after 29 minutes, but obviously even took the lead before halftime, and then at the very end we got the vintage Rosicky goal by Daniel Malen, who did manage to celebrate before tapping it away into the open net. But like I just said, I don't get to watch Dortmund as frequently as I prefer, so Matthias, you have to talk me a little bit through that game. Why were Dortmund sucky at the beginning, and why and how did they turn it around before halftime?
Well, they decided to play over 200 minutes of some of the most dog shit Bundesliga football I've seen Dortmund play. If you count Bayern, the even worse Stuttgart match, and then the first, honestly, it was like 30 minutes against Gladbach, or 29 and a half minutes. And then they decided, we're Dortmund. We should probably play good football at some point.
That feels like a very simplified explanation, but okay.
No, I mean, honestly, for me, it was funny because after the second goal from Gladbach, I was writing a very ranty tweet. And in the time it took me in time of writing that tweet, Dortmund scored 2 goals. And I did not post said tweet. And it was, I don't know what changed in their mindset, because the first 30 minutes, or first 25 at least, Dortmund they just weren't there. It was like against Stuttgart. They were slow. They lacked focus. Their passing was all over their place. Positioning wasn't there. Defensively, I don't even know what was happening. It was just complete chaos and disorganization. And then the Sabitzer goal, and I kind of equate that a little bit to, Kobe saving the goal, saving the penalty against Milan. It was like that was the impetus to pull your shit together and actually play. And they tightened things up. Their pressing was better. They actually pressed as a team. Their ball retention was better. Their passing was better, and they moved with pace. And that was the one thing that was lacking before, was there was no sense of urgency. There was no pace in their play, whether in, their running or their passing. And Gladbach, at that point, they just pulled Gladbach apart relatively, I'm not going to say easily, but in a manner in which we all want Dortmund to play. And it was some of the best Bundesliga minutes. And those 30 minutes, they played extraordinarily well. I don't honestly know why it had to start the way it did. That's a question you have to ask them, because you would think after laying an egg against Bayern and then playing as absolutely atrociously as they did against Stuttgart, that these professionals would not need to be down 2-0 to Gladbach until they finally find some focus. And I don't know if that would have happened without the Sabitzer goal, and that was kind of that, wake-up call for them. But there's a head case there that I can't put my finger on.
Lars, do you have a better explanation than Matthias?
No, and I don't think they have one either.
Good.
I mean, I think the Terzic out brigade had already convened for their weekly meeting, as Matthias alluded to with his rant, which was rudely abrupted by Dortmund scoring 2 goals. I think I was also on my phone at the time, but just because I was kind of incredulous at what I was seeing, and sometimes scrolling some apps calms me down. I mean, it wasn't just being down 2-0 against a rather pedestrian side, especially away from home like Gladbach, but also obviously the performance itself. If we're talking about wake-up calls, then after the first goal, the disallowed second goal should have been a wake-up call already, not just the second goal. And ultimately, I think this game once again proves that either momentum in football is very important, because it shifted so much that with that Reus's winning of the ball against, was it Manu Kone, immediately basically after Gladbach scored their second and were attacking again on the counter, then Dortmund scored through Sabitzer. Either that meant that Dortmund now had all the momentum, or if you don't believe in momentum, you think, why would Gladbach lose after going up by 2 goals if they had all the momentum? So I think this is one of those weird Bundesliga games that Dortmund have far too many of every season, that we try to analyze and probably overanalyze, because there isn't much to analyze. It's just in the nature of this club, apparently, to flabbergast or leave us flabbergasted sometimes, and we are sitting here and spending too much time thinking about it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I also can't make sense of why the second half was the way it was, because obviously there weren't many goals scored, and I don't know. It wasn't even half as chaotic as the first half. Gladbach had 2 shots, one by a player on the 64th and one by Koneni 82nd. But if I remember correctly, neither of those were really great chances. I feel like Dortmund had a couple more chances in the second half. I think Bynoe-Gittens had a couple like around the 54th minute or so. And I think Giorena had a pretty good chance right after the break, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, Matthias, I personally don't have too many more questions about this game, honestly, because it's a win. That's great. Gladbach is a team that Dortmund should dispatch and have dispatched quite frequently as of late. And having this Daniel Malen goal to me was nice. Certainly a bit of an iconic goal. I don't know if it's quite as iconic as the Rositzky goal. I feel like he should have celebrated a little bit more. But I love that someone tweeted or posted on X that in that situation it's either defined whether you're Rositzky or Blaszczykowski. Neither options are bad, but still very funny. So Matthias, if you have any thoughts on that Malen goal, go ahead. If not, we can move over to the next game against Leverkusen.
Well, I was just happy that he was the one who essentially started the move, winning the ball and then going. And once he got to a certain point, I was already like, it's a goal, because no one's going to catch him. He's just too dang fast. And I was just happy it wasn't Mats Hummels at that point.
Yes, yeah, he would have been caught up by other players. Obviously, I feel like Daniel Malen is still a little bit on the struggle bus. That being said, obviously scoring this open netter is nice, but I feel like against Milan, he also had a couple of opportunities where he could have done better, taken a few better decisions, etc., etc. Now, obviously, Gladbach and Milan are teams that Dortmund definitely can beat because they are mediocre, I would say. However, looking ahead to Sunday's game against Leverkusen, I'm not very confident in Dortmund's abilities, because Leverkusen right now play some of the best football in the Bundesliga, and of course have shown Dortmund in many ways how they probably should have done their transfer business in the summer, etc. So Lars, oftentimes Dortmund versus Leverkusen are very chaotic games, a lot of counterattacks, etc., etc. What can Dortmund fans expect from this? And what are your personal expectations going into the match? I think away from home, away to Leverkusen.
I mean, if the last 2 meetings are anything to go by, it's going to be a pretty drab affair. I think, if memory serves, Dortmund won both games last season. I think it was a 1-0 and then a 2-0 in after the World Cup break. The second of which Adeyemi scored his first Bundesliga goal in, and that wasn't particularly exciting. I think in the first meeting, Gregor Kobel made a number of important saves, as he tends to do. But obviously, Leverkusen are quite a different team nowadays. As you alluded to, fantastic transfer business in the summer, completely transforming what was a good side last season, especially once Xabi Alonso got them going, after the World Cup break and whatever, with, obviously Florian Wirtz coming back into full form, a few more months removed from his torn ACL. I think Leverkusen, quite possibly the best side in Europe at this point, which, sounds weird because it's Leverkusen and the Bundesliga, but I think they've won 16 out of 17 competitive matches this season, and the 17th was a 2-2 draw away to Bayern, which isn't too shabby either. Now, it wasn't necessarily a murderous row of opponents for Leverkusen because they haven't played Dortmund, they haven't played Stuttgart as far as I remember, and they're only in the Europa League, so they are playing, I think, BK Häcken from Sweden on Thursday. So it's not like they've had a Premier League type of schedule at this point, but they have beaten Leipzig, albeit with a bit of luck on the first match day. They came away from Munich with that 2-2 draw, and they're obviously in this incredible run of form where a lot of things seem to go automatically. I think we know as Dortmund pundits how that can look from the second half of last season. Sometimes you get on this kind of roll and things just look very easy, and Leverkusen is the kind of side that has that moment right now with I think Alejandro Grimaldo, their left back, has 7 league goals already in late November.
Tied first.
Which is tied first at Leverkusen with Boniface, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's kind of ridiculous. He takes incredible free kicks. He's basically right now a better version of Rafael Guerreiro at Dortmund because he's much more dynamic and as such also a better defender. Frimpong, the other fullback, is incredible. Boniface had slowed down a bit, but he's still dangerous. Florian Wirtz is an incredible player. Granit Xhaka bossing things in midfield. Palacios, a world champion, and you can see it. He's really come on over the last few months at Leverkusen. So ultimately, if you transported Leverkusen's team to Bayern and said this was Bayern's first team, nobody would say that's looking like a weak Bayern side. That's looking pretty decent, and people would say that, especially on this kind of form they are showing so far this season, this is a team you have to take a deep, long look at in terms of maybe winning the Champions League. So I think this isn't the Leverkusen of old, and we need to take them very seriously.
Yeah, I certainly am. Matthias, similar question to you, but a little bit tweaked. How do you think that Dortmund can go against this team, and what do Dortmund need to do to stop Leverkusen? Because usually the question is, what do Leverkusen have to do to stop Dortmund with their obvious weaknesses in Tah and Radecki, but even Radetzky is having a good season, and so is Tah. So what do Dortmund have to do to get away with the result away from Leverkusen, which might be a draw and might still be a good result?
Well, I guess it comes down to how you want to set up defensively. I mean, what Dortmund cannot do is have that same naive build-up play sloppiness that they showed against Stuttgart, and that lack of pace in their decision-making, in their passing, because otherwise it's just going to be just like the Stuttgart match, except that Leverkusen will then be up by 4 goals by the halftime. So in that respect, I mean, I'm very concerned because we've seen this play out before. Great midweek match, and then lay, I would say, more than an egg in the league the following weekend.
You said it came down to tiredness. Do you think
Yes.
that Dortmund played Tuesday and then will play Leverkusen on Sunday? I don't
Yeah,
think they will exert
true.
themselves too much against Häcken, however.
Yeah.
I think from a Dortmund perspective, just having these extra days of recovery, do you think that's a big boost or just a tiny factor?
I think it'll be a small factor. The good thing is against Milan, it wasn't as physically demanding as the matches against Newcastle or the cup tie against Hoffenheim. Those were the really good midweek matches after which Dortmund did not perform up to their standards in the league the following weekend. So against Milan, they were, it was because we talked about before, the pace of the match was much lower. And so you did have a few people that could rest a little bit. Schlotterbeck coming out, Reus then coming out when he did. I don't have any updates as far as what's up with them. I hope to see Gio Reyna, Julian Brandt really not having to play much against Milan, I think is a big benefit, because then he will be fully rested for the match. as far as how, your backline is, Bensebaini needs to become a little calmer. Otherwise, my concern is just that, Xabi Alonso is an intelligent man, and he will look at Bensebaini and attack that side specifically as have other
as a
coaches
weak area. Recently,
of course.
Feel like.
Of course, because you've got Bensebaini. Look at it this way. On the left side, you have Bensebaini and Schlotterbeck. When they are playing well, they are fantastic. When they're having an off day, they're a huge weakness. On the right-hand side, then you have Riasson, who is a good fullback, and then you have Mats Hummels, who's having a fantastic season. So which side are you going to go after? Obviously, you could go for pace and attack the right side of Dortmund's defense, or you can attack the players that are known to be a little bit more erratic. Especially if then you have Emre Can sliding in there as well, and you just kind of pull people over to that left side. Jamie Bynoe-Gittens plays on that left side as well. He's not exactly a stellar defender. To me, that's your weakest side. That's the side you would attack. Unless, of course, they add some more coverage and make sure Marco Reus is fit. I think Julian Brandt has played well also with his pressing and defensive work rate. Malen has improved there as well. So you do need a little bit more of a defensively stout side that is less prone to make boneheaded mistakes. And I think it'll come down to who's fit because, Schlotterbeck, I think, was suffering also from a cold. So it'll just come down to those things. You have to be top of your game and not open up the gaps in midfield and make sure you're not losing the ball in transition in midfield like Dortmund did again and again against Stuttgart, and also showed that weakness against Bayern. If they can tighten that up, I'm hopeful for a draw. If they don't, I expect Leverkusen to have a very good match against Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest strengths of this Leverkusen team is actually their positional play and how they manage to move the ball and get their players open versus other teams. And yeah, for Dortmund, it has been a struggle recently. So I expect Leverkusen to really carve Dortmund open. And we have talked about it before, be it in the Frankfurt game, be it in the Stuttgart game, obviously to some extent also the Bayern game, I presume, even though I haven't watched it. Is that Dortmund are very vulnerable on the counterattack, and Leverkusen do have lots of pace and lots of players that can hurt you. I mean, just talk about Wirtz in midfield, but even if Jonas Hofmann plays, I think he, has the wherewithal to play a through ball, etc., etc. And when we talk about Frimpong, I feel like he's probably going to be the biggest difference makers because he will be attacking down Dortmund's right side, and how easily you can break them down has been evident plenty enough in recent weeks. So I'm not really optimistic about this game whatsoever, because right now I feel like Dortmund and Leverkusen are just worlds apart from a tactical standpoint, where Leverkusen will know exactly where to target Dortmund's weaknesses, and I'm not sure Dortmund will find ways to hurt Leverkusen as much in the same way. Thus, if you have any disagreements, if you think that Leverkusen have certain weaknesses where Dortmund can easily attack and maybe I don't want to say create an upset, but I don't know, win the game, educate me, I guess.
I mean, I'm struggling to find any foothold for anyone who wants to climb the Leverkusen ladder these days. Quite honestly, I would be surprised if Dortmund came away with anything but a fairly resounding defeat there. Not even because I think Dortmund are so poor at this point, but because Leverkusen are genuinely an incredible team at this point of the season. I think maybe the law of the series, as some would say in German, das Gesetz der Serie, means that Leverkusen have to lose at some point and might as well be against Dortmund. But if if you came at this game as a completely neutral person, I think you would struggle to find any sort of actual reason why Dortmund would win this game or even come away with a point, because Leverkusen genuinely incredible. Dortmund's form against good teams in the Bundesliga this season hasn't been on point. I mean, they've only played a couple, obviously Bayern, also Stuttgart. Maybe we can put Frankfurt in that conversation. Maybe even Hoffenheim. Not many of those games in the Bundesliga were particularly good from Dortmund against good sides, and Leverkusen, discounting the fear factor that Dortmund seemed to have for Bayern, I think Leverkusen is the best team Dortmund will have faced this first half of the season when it ends in a month. And from that perspective, it's quite hard to see why Dortmund wouldn't come away with a defeat.
Yeah, I'm really not optimistic about the next two games, because Dortmund, of course, do play then in Stuttgart in the cup, and going by how the first game went, I personally am very intrigued by the adjustments that Dortmund will make, and whether they will have any immediate takeaways from those two games, then Leverkusen and the previous Stuttgart game, to apply to that Stuttgart game. But my assumption is that if this Leverkusen game has any positive effect for Dortmund, then, like I said on the last show, maybe just in the long term, and making it a bit more obvious to Dortmund's front offices where their weaknesses are, and attacking those. But obviously you need to then also make the right conclusions from something like that, if it occurs, because we all know football is a funny old game. Leverkusen might have a bad day and Dortmund might have a smash and grab, because Dortmund almost pulled something similar off away in Stuttgart, where they almost had a halftime lead, which was going to be very ridiculous. But we have seen these things happen. But personally, if I were a betting man, I would not put my money on it. So yeah, maybe we're talking Dortmund down a little too much and get shown up for it. But my assumption is that we won't be, and it's going to be an ugly game to watch. And I'm already looking forward to the next game, and hopefully that Dortmund can make amends. Away to Stuttgart, we shall see. Either way, I think this is a good way to end this episode. Matthias, Lars, thank you both for coming on this week again, and we shall be back next week after the Stuttgart game to discuss those two matches. And until then, have a great time, and as always, thank you for listening. Goodbye.